What's up, everybody? So, doing something a little bit different for this particular video. I am actually going to attempt to do all this through my computer. So, unfortunately, I do not have an outboard microphone. Um, my Yeti is, for some reason, incompatible with my laptop because it doesn't like the USB 3.0 or some weird shit like that. So, whatever. But anyway, um, what I'm doing this morning is I am going to go over the GGHD from Gamebox Solutions. So basically what this does, it's a kit that you buy. You need a VA0 or a VA1 Game Gear, and you take the motherboard out. You remove the components that take the voltage from, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 volts. Math is hard in the morning, but you remove the components that take the 9 volts and step it up to 34. Um, take out the choke, the up converter, you take out a couple of little voltage regulators. Um, you have to recap the whole entire motherboard. You have to remove the screen, the light bulb, the fuses, make sure there's no solder on there, make sure you don't rip up any of the traces where the screen goes on. And then there's a board that they have that um, basically taps into the video, the audio, and the controller stuff, and it feeds all that into HDMI. And you can upscale all the way up to 1080i. You can do 480p, 720p, which is what I have right here. Um, and we'll go over some of the features. Unfortunately, for some reason, the audio is not piping in from the console correctly to my computer. I've tried to work with that. I don't know why. It works great on my TV. There is a little bit of a hum that comes in on the audio, which I believe is inherent to the Game Gear hardware itself. Anybody who's ever owned a Game Gear knows that there's that squeal and kind of that weird underlying in the audio. And since the GGHD does not use the audio daughter board, it actually taps the audio directly off of the motherboard feed. I have to believe that's inherent to the system. And of course, whenever you're using original hardware, you are susceptible to original flaws with that hardware. Um, there is a possibility that in the future, Gamebox Solutions might introduce a new firmware that allows for some audio filtering or might try to filter the audio intelligently. I'm not sure, but as is right now, I am getting 720p video. The audio is fine once you start playing the game. I will say that the high pitch hum is worse with the EverDrive than it is with the stock cartridge. But once you start playing the game, it's really not that noticeable, to be honest with you. So right now, the video that we have displayed here is coming off of the GGHD through my EverDrive into my computer. And I'll go ahead and I'll take this off here real quick. Okay, bear with me. So there's the system all put together. Um, I will say the quality of this case, left side looks great. Front and bottom look great. Right side looks like absolute ass. I am not happy about this, and thankfully I have a friend who has a 3D printer who has offered to make a new top for me, but quality control really dropped the ball over here. So there's that. It uses a Genesis controller. I have a 6-button stock Genesis controller over here that I'm using on it, but pretty small form factor. Um, the case, everything fits in there really nice. There is a God, I can't talk this morning. Okay, so the bottom has brass standoffs for the screws to go into, which is really, really nice. Um, these here, just there's little recesses and they glue on. I use double-sided tape so I can hot swap them if I get new ones. But that's what it looks like. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the on-screen display, and you have to hold down, start, and C at the same time on your controller. Okay, so that brings that up there in the upper left-hand corner, and if you hit A, you can switch resolutions, which I'm not going to do because I did a test video, and whenever I upped it, it froze the whole entire stream. Scaling, so you have proper, you have stretched, and then you have TV. I prefer proper. Overscanning, this basically helps the image fill your television more. I prefer to keep it without the overscanning on. Main reason being, on a 32-inch television, the windowed view is more than fine. Plus, it helps maintain the original aspect ratio of the graphics. Um, yeah, to me, it just looks better. Then you have your, these are different aspect ratios. D and P. So I think DAR stands for device aspect ratio, and PAR is peripheral aspect ratio. So um, to get into a little bit of the technicality of the Game Gear, you have the clock and then you have the peripheral clock. And I do believe that the Game Gear actually upscales the video, if you want to call it upscaling, but it frames the video intelligently to fit the LCD screen in the original. But the actual video feed is slightly different, raw from the pins. So I like to use TAR. Then I'll go back here, hit B. You have some picture configuration settings, which I don't like filters, to be honest with you. The enhanced filter's okay. Smooth looks like butt. Sharp looks like even worse butt. The enhance is fine. You can change the brightness of the filter. Gamer correction, basically, it will dull to grays for you. I like to leave it. I like to leave it off, um, just because this is more what I see on my modded Game Gear whenever I fire it up. Grid lines are gross. Scan lines. So it looks like poo here, but if you take the scan lines and use the enhanced filter and you play it on your TV, it doesn't look too bad, but it just goes from bad to worse. So, like I said, I like to leave all the filters off except for the gamer correction. Actually, no, I turned the gamer correction off too. So, I personally like to leave all the filters off. I think the filters just poorly emulate an experience that you're really not going to get anyways from a stock Game Gear, just because the screen sucks so bad and it's so hard to see, and the Game Gear was never meant to be put on television. So the fact that this is happening is just kind of an abomination. So we'll back out. Info, this just tells you what the firmware is and the designers. Like I said, BinVin is doing a custom firmware for this that's supposed to do some video improvements. I've been reading about it online on Reddit. I'm not 100% sure when it's going into effect, but I will be interested to see if there's something I can do to maybe implement that on mine at a later point in time. So, okay, so we'll back out and let me go to here, go here. Okay, so we're going to go to Game Gear and let's go ahead. Let's find a game that I don't think ever made it. Okay, Vampire Master of Darkness. So this game never came out in the United States on the Master System. It was released in Europe on the Master System just as Master of Darkness. It's considered to be probably one of the best import games you can get, and the reason being is it plays a lot like Castlevania, like a lot like Castlevania. Again, I apologize for no in-game audio. I really don't know what's going on. It could be because the HDMI is technically emulated off of the device, and maybe my capture card just doesn't particularly play nice with that feature. But as you can tell, the display, the colors are really nice, they're vibrant. Having the Genesis controller is a godsend for playing Game Gear games because the D-pad is so much tighter. Um, the Master System suffered from a mushy D-pad, and so did the Game Gear. But the Genesis had a great D-pad, and just kind of having that feel in your hands is a night and day difference as far as your overall gameplay experience. You get some games like this where you have diagonals. I absolutely love it. If you haven't played Vampire, I highly suggest you check it out. Vampire is probably one of my top 3 favorite Game Gear games of all time. Like I said, it plays a lot like Castlevania, which, if you know me, you know I love the Castlevania series. It's got a pretty neat storyline involving Jack the Ripper for some reason. Never knew Jack the Ripper had anything to do with vampires, but Sega. But yeah, overall, playing with the Genesis pad is just absolutely amazing, and I love it. Um, Unfortunately, I do not have the in-game reset set up because for some reason it messes things up on certain games, so I choose to turn that off. But yeah, navigating these diagonals is phenomenal. And just to be able to play this and have the video be bright and have it feel like sitting down and playing these games, on a master system or something like that, it's phenomenal and I love it. Um, Now, I know some people probably are thinking, well, what about devices like the Game Gear adapter on the Retron 5 or the Mega SG or the analog? And I'll be honest with you, I've only played Game Gear on a Retron 5, which is fine. But things to keep in mind with the Retron 5 is that it's emulation. I mean, there's no two ways around it. The Retron 5 is nothing more than an Android box using RetroArch with a custom overlay on it. That's all it is, which is fine. It's a nice way to play a lot of systems in HD. There's a lot of cool features with the Retron 5. Um, I like the fact that you can hook up controllers to it, you know, so you don't have to use their crappy stock controller. So technically, you can do this with the Retron 5, but um, as far as the scaling options and keeping the original video feel of the Game Gear and things of that nature, it just doesn't do it. And same with the Mega SG and the Analog Pocket. Um, those, well, not the Analog Pocket, but or maybe it is. I don't know. One of my friends was telling me they have the Mega SG, and I don't know if you can hook the Analog Pocket up to a TV or not. I think you can, but they were complaining that the aspect ratio is forced 4 by 3. Like there's no two ways around it. You cannot scale the video down to have the original feel of the Game Gear like you can with this. Um, Granted, those systems are going to have better audio quality than what this one does, um, just because they're using better hardware as far as the audio circuit, so you're not getting interference, you're not getting that high pitched hum. And that's fine. I'll be the first to admit it is annoying whenever you have a really great piece of hardware that it is, it is current technology, but it's also limited by hardware that's 30 years old. And, you know, but also kind of, it helps with nostalgia a little bit too. That audio hum is kind of a endearing part of the system. It's annoying, but it's kind of like taking away the green off of the Game Gear, which I know some people complain about whenever I show off the modded Game Gears that I always put the screen in black and white and oh, it looks too sharp. Well, I've since set up my Game Boys to try to emulate the green as much as possible, and also use the retro pixel effect to um, pretty good overall effect. But yeah, so as far as the install goes, it's not the worst install I've ever done. Recap and board installation altogether took about, I want to say, 2.5 hours. Granted, it was the first time, and I kept referencing the directions, which I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do that. There's there is a lot of room for error here. Um, there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong if you don't know what you're doing or you don't have intermediate soldering skills. You could possibly rip the traces off of the screen interface. You could rip off traces that you need. You could burn up the board. There are things that could go wrong. However, if you've done a recap on a Game Gear, maybe especially if you've installed a clean screen or a McWhale screen, you have the skills to do it. The hardest part is lining up the castellated edges on the HDMI interface board and getting those solder joints perfect without doing any bridging. The instructions say nothing about checking for continuity, but I would highly suggest get a multimeter, check those connections, make sure there's no bridges. Um, you should always check all your connections anyway, even your controller connections. Check those things. It will save you so much freaking time and heartache in the long run, and you can fix mistakes before they even become an issue while you're playing. The wires, they suggest using 30 or 34 gauge wire wrap. I use 30 gauge in this, and some people have complained, oh, 30 gauge sucks, blah, 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 blah. Well, the main reason they do that is the signals that you're putting through are microvolts. I mean, you don't need to have a heavy gauge for those signals to travel properly. They do recommend that the wire that you use to tap into the clock be short, which makes a lot of sense. Clock signals can be very weak, very susceptible to noise. So the shorter the wire, the less chance of interference and the less chance of losing signal over the distance that the signal is traveling. Which I know I'm getting way too technical here, but other than that, you're just basically tapping into the controls, up, down, left, right, start, BA, and there is the controller port they use on this is a regular DB9. They have you remove the metal shroud off the front, which I'm not 100% too keen on. I don't like having exposed pins without protection, but I would say that if you're not an idiot and you don't have a bunch of, irresponsible people hanging around your stuff, it should be fine. I'm getting my butt kicked here. All right, Jack the freaking Ripper. But anyways, like I said, I I enjoy it. The audio issue to me, once you start playing a game, you don't even notice it that much, to be honest with you. Yeah. Once the music kicks in and everything, it's not bad. I mainly notice it on the menu. Man, this dude is tough. Give me a second here and I'll do some final thoughts if I beat this guy. Even if I don't beat him. Oh, I love this. There we go. Okay. So, final thoughts. I know I've said a lot. I know I talked a lot. Some of it didn't make any sense. But final thoughts. The the concept behind it is really cool. Being able to play your Game Gear in high definition using original hardware on your television is a great thing. I love the scaling options. I love the fact that you can kind of tweak the video to make it look the way you want it to look. Like I said, I don't like filters. Some people do. If that's your thing, there are options there. I think they need a little bit of refinement. The audio issue, here again, if they're able to fix that with a firmware update or at least offer some audio filtering options, that would be phenomenal. If not, it is what it is. Install difficulty is intermediate. I'm not going to say it's too advanced, um, but you definitely want to have a desoldering gun or at least a decent desoldering pump. I I couldn't imagine doing this with just desoldering braid. It would be a bear, especially pulling off the voltage of converter and trying to remove the little voltage regulators. A chisel tip soldering iron will come in amazing. If you don't have one, there are ways to do it. You just have to be really careful that you don't destroy your board or rip up any traces. Um, Here again, whenever you're doing a recap, if you want to do electrolyte, it does fix the problem, but eventually those are going to leak. I use ceramic. Everybody who knows me knows that I preach about ceramic and how great ceramic is, and how ceramic makes for just a much cleaner install. It basically bulletproofs your system. Um, so the recap is what it is. Installing the board's not too hard except for the castellated edges. Again, make sure you have your multimeter. Check for continuity. Make sure there's no bridges, all that fun stuff. And the case, I think mine was a misprint. Honestly, there's been so much bullshit with getting this system out to the public. I pre-ordered in late November. They said they were supposed to ship in December. Well, then they were going to give the design of the shell to a company to do injection molding. They wanted too much money, so they decided, forget that, we'll go back to the 3D case design. Their 3D printers went down. They moved. There was a snowstorm, and then they had to get their 3D printer environment back online, this, that, and the other thing. Um, there are some issues with the single ASIC revision of the board. With the EverDrive, um, there have been some reports of video distortion, which I experienced on one of my modded Game Gears um, a while ago, and it kind of freaked me out. But I think a lot of that just has to do with the design. And Crix is an amazing engineer. I love his EverDrives. The guy, through a war, relocated himself and still managed to produce product, even though it was in limited qualities. Um, so, but mine is dual ASIC. As you can see, the video looks great. What else can I say about it? Using the Genesis controller is great. Um, so overall, is it worth the money? If you love the Game Gear, you want to play the Game Gear on the big screen, you want to be able to use original hardware, you want to be able to have some pretty good scaling options, definitely worth the money. Definitely worth the money. I would not buy the already built kits though. To me, they are extremely overpriced. And with that case print being so shitty, it's not worth the money to buy a pre-built one. I would suggest getting a Game Gear. Just make sure it turns on. That's the biggest thing. Don't worry about the audio. Just make sure it turns on and the screen displays something, even if it slides. You can buy broken Game Gears for like $30. Um, Sometimes up to $40, $50. Make sure it's a VA0 or VA1, which if you flip the Game Gear over and you look at the serial number on the back, actually I can show you here. I have a whole stack of them. Not the serial number. but the model number on the back on this sticker should say 2110. No letters. If it says 2110, you are guaranteed to have either a VA0 or a VA1, unless somebody did a shell swap, which is pretty rare. If you have the blue Sports Edition Game Gear, 100% it's going to be compatible. They did not make those into VA4 and the VA5, nor did Majesco get a hold of that. Um, so that's an easy way to tell. I would definitely suggest if you are not comfortable with the soldering iron, or you have some reservations about doing very fine soldering, find somebody you trust, find a modder. Um, if I were to do one of these, I'm going to be honest with you, I'd probably charge $100 for the install, which I feel is fair. Main reason being is it is a labor-intensive thing. I usually charge $30 an hour. I do charge a little bit more for things that involve a little bit more technicality. For instance, the X Station. Now, Voltar is an amazing guy. He's a great modder. He's very smart. I love his designs. Voltar charges $100 to install an X Station. I charge 50. I can tear down a PlayStation, install the X Station, do all the checks electronically, rebuild it, test it in under 60 minutes. Okay, but it is a very technical install, so honestly, it does. It takes me an hour, but because of the technicality, I do charge a little bit more, and yet my prices are less than Voltar's, and I will guarantee that my installs are every bit as clean as his are. Um, like I said, he's a smart guy, and I do like him just because he understands the why of how things work. There are so many modders out there. I won't name anybody because I don't want to piss anybody off, Ben Fong, but who, you know, oh, crispy ass graphics. Well, you want to use cool terms and you want to come off as being the cool guy who does all these RGB mods. That's great, but do you understand the why? Do you understand how you're getting that signal? Do you understand the actual, you know, the components, the circuitry, the traces, how it all goes together? Do you understand that? Probably not. You're probably some guy who can read directions and you think you're cool because it works. And by all means, if that's your type of person, fine. That's fine. But having people who actually understand the why, who can troubleshoot and things like that, we're a rare breed. And I don't like to toot my own horn. My business is small. I do this for fun. I do this as a hobby. Um, it's nice to go out to trade shows and shake hands and meet people and talk about cool tech and have people actually want me to provide this service. It's kind of an honor, because without people looking up, looking at my services as something good, I wouldn't have a business. So, I'm definitely thankful for that. And I know other people rely on modding business a lot more than I do for an income, But yeah, just like I said, you're free to choose whoever you want, but if somebody can't tell you the why or uses broad stroke terms, oh, these components over here, you remove them. Well, what are those components? Do you know what those components do? Do you know what you're doing with those components? I can tell you that the components you remove in this, you're disabling the 34 volts so that you don't overload the power supply. You don't end up burning up the system. Plain and simple. All the components you remove are related to the 34 volt circuit that powers the LED light. Well, it's not LED. Yeah, it's a CFL. My bad. So I know that other people may not. Other people are like, oh, electrolyte. Some of these electrolyte recaps look like ass. They're not even clean. You could do a clean recap using full-size caps. Here again, I use ceramic and I don't use hot air. I do it all by hand. So, but anyway, done tooting my own horn. GGHD, I love it. Does it need a little help? Yes. Do they need quality control in their cases? Yes. Will it benefit from future firmware updates? Hopefully. But definitely worth the money, and I will probably give this thing an 8 out of 10. So until later, guys, have fun. Keep gaming.